Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, on Foreign Affairs, you and I speak with one voice from different sides of the aisle and with different accents. So since October 7th, I have been meeting and talking with and receiving messages from the families of the more than 200 people that Hamas abducted in the most gruesome and savage attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And the families are frustrated, they're angry, yet they are hopeful that if we in Congress weigh in and use the power of the U.S. Congress, we can somehow secure the release of all the hostages. The captives are not just Israeli, they are not just Americans, they are more than 40 different nationalities. And yesterday, one of the hostage families made a very compelling statement when it came to seeking the release of the hostages. They said, don't propose a selection process like they did during the Holocaust, where some were selected to be saved and others were left to be murdered. So I'm here because I'm seeking answers. What can we in Congress be doing to secure the release of all the hostages in Gaza? And while I appreciate the multiple steps that you laid out for what we should be doing in the long term, the question that I want to ask is, what can we in Congress be doing today to make a difference to secure the release of the hostages? Mr. Genzer, Dr. Kotler, I pose that question to either of you.
Well, obviously, this is a very complicated and challenging moment, and the injustice obviously is palpable as it relates to the women, the children, even the babies grabbed by Hamas and taken to Gaza. There are no, we all know, quick or easy answers. I think that negotiating their release and trying to get that done as quickly as possible has to be a top priority. I think that once Israel were to invade Gaza, it will become that much harder. And I think that, in the near term, we do need to focus on those that are most in need of help or support. While I fully appreciate and understand your approach, Madam Congresswoman, in terms of trying to get them all out simultaneously without going through a selection process, it's historically not been the case that that's the way that things have been done. Ultimately, there's going to be no satisfying answers here. At the end of the day, there's no easy military solution. I'm sure that they're spread throughout Gaza, and the kind of demands that Hamas is going to make for the release of the hostages are going to be extraordinary. So I wish I had some quick or easy answers. I think from Congress, the most important thing to do is to be meeting with the families of the hostages, to be telling their stories, to put out photos of what happened. I think that we also need to be telling the story of what Hamas actually did and putting out these horrific photos with obviously families' permission of what they were doing as well, because we are living in this inverse morality world, as Professor Kotler said, where somehow up is down and left is right, and we need the moral clarity to be able to have a discussion about what Hamas did without equivocation, without justification, without context. And as a separate conversation, we can talk about what Israel's doing in Gaza in response to its right to self-defense and make sure that they're doing things consistent with international law.
Thank you. I want to turn to Dr. Kotler. I want to ask you a question because there have been accusations of genocide being hurled at Israel as it goes after the Hamas terrorists who so savagely attacked Israeli civilians. Can you talk to us about what the definition of genocide is and address this accusation?
Well, the Genocide Convention sets forth 5 mass atrocities that would constitute acts of genocide. And it includes as well the targeting of a people in whole or in part, for their destruction. It includes, serious acts of criminal murder and the like. But what I want to say with regard to these 5 acts of genocide is when one looks at it, it is Hamas that is perpetrating these acts of genocide. And when you have the accusations against Israel, it's what's known as the false accusation in the mirror, namely to accuse the victim of the very crimes that the perpetrator are committing. When you mentioned that October 7th was the worst day in Jewish history since the Holocaust. If I may, just on a personal level, I was in Jerusalem on that October 7th. I was there with my family to celebrate my son's marriage. That Saturday was supposed to be a particularly festive Jewish Sabbath because it was taking place on the last day of the holiday of Sukkot, which is one of the most festive Jewish holidays in the Jewish tradition, where we celebrate not only Jewish indigeneity, but our common responsibilities, our common humanity. It was also the day of Simchat Torah, when we complete the reading of the 5 books of Moses and start it again. In other words, a celebratory day. But that day turned into one of horrors too terrible to be believed, but not too terrible to have happened. And it is etched in my mind, in my being forever. And that is why when we speak now about the question of hostages, you mentioned 40 different nationalities. That's why we need a multilateral coalition that can speak collectively on behalf of these community of hostages from 40 different countries. That's why we need to adopt an action implementation plan as a matter of urgency that this multilateral coalition can pursue. That is why we need to ensure that the foundational norms of international human rights and humanitarian law and the Genocide Convention, which requires all state parties to the Genocide Convention to prevent, to protect against, and to punish acts of genocide. And that means that Hamas, that is engaged as we speak in ongoing and standing incitement to genocide, which is itself a standalone breach of the Genocide Convention, even if mass atrocities don't follow. So that from 1988 on, they have been engaged in standing breaches of the Genocide Convention without accountability. We have to now collectively ensure that there is accountability, that there is, at this point, the prevention, the protection against, and the punishment of those engaged in acts of genocide, and combat the false inversions where you go ahead and accuse the victim of the various, as I said, the various genocidal acts that the perpetrator, that Hamas is engaged in, aided and abetted, and we should not forget this, by Khamenei's Iran, which has armed, trained, financed, supported, and incentivized Hamas, which is effectively a proxy, along with Hezbollah, terrorist proxies of Iran. And one should not forget this axis of evil.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Kathy Manning. Indeed, we are soulmates and look forward to working